You're watching Morning at NTV.
Well, it does give me great pleasure to know that you're still watching Morning at NTV this beautiful Wednesday, the 9th of October, 2019, which also happens to be Uganda's Independence Day. Celebrations will be held in Sironko district right there. You had the RDC of Sironko, Mr. Isaac, coming out to say politicians should desist from politicizing this event and allow everyone, each Ugandan from all walks of life, to attend, even people from abroad. Just come in and just have a good time. No politics, nothing. Just national unity, security, freedom, and prosperity. That's the theme of today's celebrations right there that are being held in Sironko district. The banter today is basically where did we come from and where we are at right now and where we are headed. Now we're heading into our Take Note conversation, the making of Uganda as a state. Just a brief preamble. When Captain Frederick Lugard declared Uganda a British protectorate in 1894, he had no idea where we would be today. He had conquered our kings, put an end to wars of conquest, but over 100 years later, we as people still fall back into our tribal cocoons in times of trouble. Why? Could this mean Lugard, however, there may be elements where he succeeded? Joining me in studio to discuss the making of Uganda as a state is Mr. Mwambustya Ndebesa, a senior lecturer at Makerere University. He joins me right now. Good morning and welcome, Mr. Ndebesa.
Good morning to you and good morning to the viewers and listeners.
First of all, Mr. Ndebesa, what is Uganda? Are we a nation or a state?
Uganda is more or less basically a country with a state, some elements of the nation, but technically speaking, Uganda is not yet a nation state. I usually use a computer metaphor, which I can still continue to use, that to have a nation state is like having a fully functioning computer. A computer has the hardware bit and the software bit. So a state as something that you can touch with boundaries and the flag and the constitution is like a hardware, which we do have, that's a state. But a nation would imply that you have a people that share in common myth of origin, common history, common values, common norms, common even prospects for the future. That they are a people who are connected. You know, Uganda, which comes from Buganda, and Buganda, which also comes from a bundle. Like you have got a bundle of firewood. That's Omuganda. That's Uganda. But you see, you can have a bundle of firewood which is not properly tied. And as you carry it, some logs can just get off and even hit your heels. So I think Uganda is a bundle that is not properly tied. In other words, the software is still somehow malfunctioning. We are not yet a people who feel that we share common destiny in future, or we share common norms or history. There is still loyalty to the tribes rather than loyalty to the nation Uganda or the country Uganda. So there is a sense in which it is a state with a malfunctioning nationhood. Yes.
Because there are no common values as a nation.
They may be there, but they are not strong.
Yes.
It is like you have got a bundle that has got strings that are not properly tied.
So we are looking at a state.
We are a state because we have common boundaries.
Yes.
We are recognized by the United Nations. We have got recognized international boundaries. We have got a constitution. We have got a government. We have got state institutions like the army, the police, the civil service. But the commonality of Uganda, the consensus, there is no national consensus. And those feelings that are issues of the heart, not just of the mouth, are still lacking. And that's why it is a state that needs to be built. It is a state that was actually created by the British in, as you said, since 1894, but whose process and project of nation building is still ongoing But sometimes there is 2 steps ahead and 1 step backward.
Let's head a little bit back in time in 1894 when Lugard declared Uganda a British protectorate. What was Britain's intention? Did they just need a client state whose resources they needed to plunder? Or was their intention to promote democracy? Because that's what they used to say. We are here to promote democracy all over the world. Or did they just need a client state whose resources they just needed to plunder? What was their intention when Lugard declared Uganda British protectorate in 1894?
Yeah, some small corrections there is that the British, well, Uganda was declared a British protectorate, not necessarily by proclamation of Lugard, but it was officially and formally published in the London Gazette. So the legal instrument for the declaration of Uganda as a British protectorate was not necessarily the mouth of somebody. It was officially, it was published in the London Gazette.
Yes.
Like official documents normally are legalized when they are published in the Gazette, like we now have the Uganda Gazette. Secondly, the British did not, I think, declare like that they came to establish democracy in Uganda. Mainly at that time, the slogan was civilizing. They were on a civilizing mission, not a democratization mission. So the civilizing mission was based on the assumption that Africa or Africans or the African continent was still backward and civilized. They didn't know God and all those things. So the mission was officially, publicly, it was civilizing mission. But on the other hand, we know, and they even know at heart, that their mission was actually to get areas of new investment, to get areas where they could get cheap raw materials, cheap labor for their home industries. However, by coincidental or by incidentally, as they did that, they established a state, and they established state machinery and some other infrastructure and productive forces. So there is a way in which Uganda or Ugandans benefited, but not because that was the intention, the motive, but they had to construct, for example, the Uganda Railway. This railway from Mombasa to Kisumu was constructed in about 4 years, and it was a heavy investment. Remember, by the way, since they left, we have possibly not constructed even a meter of a railway line. But they constructed that railway line, to which was a heavy investment, opening up land for the first time. So, but the intention, the ultimate aim, goal, was for their own interest in terms of getting higher returns from investment that they were going to make in this virgin area where labor was cheap and products of labor were also cheap.
So you say one of their main reasons why they invaded Uganda was that they wanted to promote civilization. Do you think they were able to achieve this feat within those 68 years as a British protectorate?
You see, for them, that was what they thought. Because first of all, being civilized or not civilized is subjective. But they thought they were promoting civilization, which actually was not necessarily the case.
Did they succeed?
Well, possibly they did, according from their point of view, because we are now speaking English.
Yes.
And that is not necessarily civilization, but what they meant by civilization was their influence.
Assimilation.
Influence. No, they never aimed at the assimilation like the French, but at least having impact, influence, so that we could think like them. If you can use a computer metaphor again, the software, the African software, we speak English, we admire the English, everything good is English, even when it is not grown in tropical, in temperate regions. You say a good potato is English, a good banana is English. So there is a way in which they managed to influence our thinking, our norms, and they are the ones who also brought Christianity. You can see Ugandans, at least on the surface, they are almost 100%, no, not 100%, but at least 80% Christian by declaration. At heart, we don't know. So there is a way in which they managed to make Uganda a British sphere of influence, as they said then, especially after the Berlin Colonial Conference in 1884-85. So Uganda has had influence from the British. there is a sense in which they succeeded. But I wouldn't want to call that civilization per se, but influence of British. Britishness. There is a way in which there is Britishness here, and that is why we are even still in the British Commonwealth.
So do we still see that influence today of the British, even after getting independence 57 years later? Do you still feel like there are some elements of that British colonial rule making its way within coffers of state enterprises in Uganda?
The British influence will never end. It is something that is historical and will never end, because even our national language is English here, or the official language here is English. Most of our education systems are based on the English model. Our parliament here, if you look at it even graphically,
yes,
you see the arrangement. Even the seats of members of parliament are green, like those of England.
Yes.
So their influence will never go away, but it may not be so total. But the influence is here to stay, and even the naming, you have Lake Victoria, which was named after the Queen of England, I think Lake Albert, which was named after her husband or something like that, Lake Edward. You know, even the naming of our streets are still somehow British. So there is no way we shall avoid the British influence. However, that doesn't mean that everything in Uganda or in Uganda is necessarily British. Yes.
Well, the British also, when they came, their other aim was to instill democratic values amongst the Africans, and we are still using that democratic model that they introduced. Do you think it has been elevated, or has it been watered down?
I've never found it anywhere written that the British came here to promote democracy. I mean, colonialism in itself, by its nature, is authoritarian. It was not aiming at...
They had a problem with the monarchical kind of way that we were ruling our people in Africa as a whole. So they thought maybe if you could introduce this kind of democracy, these people will be more organized.
But the British were also a monarch and still a monarchy. So I don't think they have problem. They had a problem with the monarchy. They had possibly, they wanted to promote some of our, actually under indirect rule. They retained those traditional institutions, but of course in a modified form under their terms. They were not against the monarchy, but they were introducing, if you want, instead of talking about the democracy, they introduced some more modern, if you want to call it that, ways of governance, of responsibility of the state, and maybe of listening to, not even listening to the voices of the people, but holding the state somehow responsible to serving the citizens, but not democracy the way we know it, because democracy means citizens' participation in their public affairs. The colonial rule did not aim at that. Towards independence, the decade of 1950s, they started introducing forms of democracy. I think 1955, that's when we had local councils and local council elections. In 1958, there were elections to the Legislative Council, the then Parliament. They started introducing piecemeal some democratic forms of governance, but initially that's not what they were doing. They introduced those when they realized they were about to go away, and therefore they wanted
to save face,
to introduce some forms of democracy to leave behind. But originally, when they didn't even expect to live in a short time, then they were not.
So it had nothing to do with democracy or trying to advance something positive in Africa, just to plunder our resources.
Not to plunder as such, not to plunder. I think that there is a misconception there. Not necessarily to plunder, but the major goal was benefiting their economies, but not necessarily to plunder without giving something to the Africans. By the way, I have heard people even on this NTV since last night, people talking about Cohen, and seeming to say that Cohen was here doing nothing. Cohen, a colonial governor, was one of the progressive governors or progressive administrators I can think of in Uganda, though under, of course, the bigger context of colonialism. Cohen is the one who introduced secular schools in Uganda. He had that vision because Ugandan schools had been promoted on sectarian grounds or denominational grounds. He's the one who started schools like Entire School, which were purely secular on those lines. Cohen, under the leadership of Cohen, is when the African Savings and Credit Bank was introduced to give loans to the Africans, which was later Uganda Commercial Bank, now which is Stanbic. Cohen is the one who introduced Uganda Development Corporation. Cohen's rule is the one which introduced, I think, Coffee Marketing Board and all those boards. During the time of Cohen is actually when laws relaxed for trade unions to exist, is when laws relaxed even for political parties to be established. So Cohen as an individual, I think, was progressive, and he wanted Uganda to get independence as one country, not as small entities, which actually the Africans were wanted. So Cohen was more progressive than most African leaders and institutions who were actually reactionary.
Well, I'm going to ask you a futuristic question. When the British came here, the Omukama of Bunyoro, that's the Kabalega, he was on a warpath to conquer the whole of Uganda at the time, the whole of Uganda. Yes. Now, do you think if he had not been interrupted, just like Germany's Otto von Bismarck, he would have been able to forge a state in East Africa out of blood and iron?
You see, all states, actually the what we call natural states in quotes, were forged dynamically from internal dynamics. So the English were not English. It was just maybe one county or one tribe that has amalgamated others by force and imposed a language and culture and the norms into that community. Yes. The French were the same. The Italians were the same. Those are the natural way that states were formed or founded. So maybe Kabarega, but it's hypothetical. Maybe Kabarega, maybe any other ruler could have evolved in Uganda and forced all these different communities that were still autonomous and small scale into a bigger nation and imposed maybe one's tribe or one's community culture and norms on the rest and created a nation state through internal dynamics. What we have today in Uganda was a British creation, superficially imposed on communities in Uganda from external origin, and that is why, to a certain extent, Uganda has remained just a hardware and not a software, a state that is superimposed on the people which had no internal dynamics that created links between citizens and their rulers or their governors in a way which would be dynamically evolved within here, and you would have what we call organic linkage between the citizens and society. There is no organic linkage between the state in Uganda and society, and that is where we have challenges in the African continent, and we call our states or our countries post-colonial states that have unique challenges which the other states did not face.
So, Mr. Mwambustya, as we wrap up, why do we keep falling into our tribal canons every time there's a problem? You've witnessed this a lot of times.
You see, as we pointed out from the beginning, Uganda is not yet a fully functioning nation state. So the different communities still pay allegiance to their communities. Incidentally, there is something interesting here. You'll find some tribes in Uganda here have got what they call national anthems. That is, they call them national anthems because they are anthems of their tribes. And when you listen to them, I've listened to them and picked some messages. They seem to be saying, we, Baganda, we, Banyoro, we, Batoro, are actually a nation, which is not the case, really. Those are nationalities, technically speaking. The nation state should be the Uganda one. So those are still challenges of a young country like Uganda, a young country that is trying to become a nation, because Uganda is only 120, how many years? 26 years?
Yes, yes.
Since 1894. That is a young period in the age of a nation. And we are still building a nation. However, we need to have that one as a clear goal, and so that we work towards it. But at times, you find our politics and our governance and our systems sometimes do not work towards that goal, and we start building state institutions, state governance, political parties, political processes around tribes, sometimes by zero deceptive, deceiving the public that we are not sectarian rhetorically, when actually in practice we are sectarian. We would want to see a government in a system which is building for the nation, both in theory and practice, not just paying lip service to nation building and not being sectarian, when in practice we are actually sectarian.
Mr. Ndebesa, we are about to get into the traffic update, but before we do, another contentious issue. The president just repealed the colonial law, idle and disorderly law. Is there a need to repeal all these colonial laws that have continued to secretly make their way in our rules to fully be independent?
I think we should, but is that the aim of government?
So it's political will.
There is where the colonial laws actually are in favor of government, and those ones will be kept. You'll find this.
So they are only repealing those that are not working in their favor.
Is it preventive act or something like that? That one, they go into the archives of the colonial period to use it for the purpose today. Then where it suits the government to repeal them, they do repeal them. So I think the Law Reform Commission should look at all those colonial laws, and we discuss them really, because those should be serving the people. We see those which are commensurate with the times of the day, and retain them and then remove others, because not all colonial laws or laws made during the colonial period are necessarily negative. It depends the purpose for which they were intended to serve. And there are colonial laws which intended to serve the purpose of controlling Africans, controlling Africans from enjoying their rights, which have been retained on our law books for the purposes also of containing the Africans. But there are those which were not necessarily negative. So it depends who is looking at them and why he is looking at them and for what purpose, because the law can be an instrument for liberation, but law can also be an instrument for control and domination. And where the government today wants to control citizens and deny them certain rights, it will use the colonial law. It suits them. So where they feel it doesn't suit them, then they will repeal it. It depends who is repealing, and we should discuss these ones in the general public, not just to leave government to selectively select the laws that serves their purpose and leave out those that don't serve their purpose in a selfish manner.
Ideally, we are talking about selective justice.
Selective justice.
Selective application of justice.
Selective application of laws.
Yes.
Where they suit you, you use them. Where they don't suit you, you remove them.
And in your opinion, this should totally change?
What do you mean totally change now? What we are saying is that...
Meaning we should repeal all these colonial laws to make way for justice in Uganda in its entirety.
All colonial laws are not necessarily unsuitable for citizens. Some are.
So we should keep what works for us.
But those which works for us as citizens. Remember, let's complete like this. We are now citizens, we are not subjects.
Yes.
We are citizens, we are independent. However, sometimes this independence we are celebrating is actually, as Mamdan puts it, state independence, not citizens' independence. We are now saying that we should embark on the road to have citizens' independence rather than state independence only. And today, as we commemorate, most of the people who are commemorating are state people, state officials. But the ordinary citizen on the street, the ordinary citizen in the village, does not feel that there is independence to commemorate today. We need to have a situation where we all own this independence and feel it that actually there is citizens' independence rather than have state independence as the situation is today.
Awesome. Mwambustya Ndebesa, a senior lecturer at Makerere University. Thank you for making the time to speak to NTV.
Thank you for inviting me to also share my views with the citizens.
Indeed.
On this day when we are commemorating, not necessarily celebrating.
Yes. Well, according to Mr. Ndebesa, this is a state celebration, not a citizen celebration. And the latter should be the ideal celebration that all Ugandans should be able to enjoy. You're watching Morning at NTV with me, Mwambustya. Right about now, we're going to Lake